The glow of the desk lamp barely reached the corners of my office, where shadows loomed like the doubts that had haunted me for months. The manila envelope sat on the desk, its edges crisp, its weight unbearable. It felt like Pandora's box, promising to unleash a storm I wasn't sure I could weather. Yet, I had paid for the truth, and now it lay before me, daring me to confront it. My hands trembled as I slid the contents onto the desk. A series of photographs spilled out first, each one more damning than the last. There was Emily, my wife of 12 years, laughing with a man I didn't recognize. Another photo showed them seated at a small cafe, her hand resting lightly on his. The final image was the hardest to stomach, the two of them exiting a hotel lobby, their closeness unmistakable. I reached for the report next. The private investigator had been thorough, chronicling her double life in stark detail. The affair had begun 3 years ago, during one of Emily's frequent work trips. The name Greg appeared repeatedly in the text, a man who had become as much a part of her reality as I had been pushed out of it. There were email exchanges, receipts for dinners, and even a record of a shared gym membership at a place she had never mentioned. The anger came in waves, followed swiftly by a crushing sadness. How had I missed this? The signs had been there, but I had chosen to ignore them. Her guarded phone, the sudden nights out with friends she rarely named, the way she had stopped laughing at my jokes. It was all so obvious now, laid bare in the cold language of facts and timestamps. I sat back in my chair, the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. My thoughts turned to our children, 8-year-old Sarah and 5-year-old Liam. What would this do to them? I envisioned the shattered pieces of our family, their young faces twisted with confusion and pain. The thought was almost too much to bear. But then, a flicker of resolve ignited within me. Emily had made her choices, but I still had mine. I wasn't just going to let this destroy me. I would fight for my children, for my dignity, for the life I had built. I would not let her selfishness define our future. I stood and began to pace, the adrenaline coursing through me. I needed a plan. The first step was to protect what mattered most, Sarah and Liam. My lawyer, Mary, had always said that preparation was key in cases like these. With a surge of determination, I resolved to document everything, financial records, parenting schedules, and the proof of Emily's betrayal. If she wanted to gamble with our lives, I would make sure she lost. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. Emily was home. I quickly gathered the evidence and slipped it into a locked drawer. Composing myself, I stepped out of the office and into the kitchen, where she was unpacking groceries. "Hey," she greeted me, her voice light, as though everything was normal. "Hey," I replied, forcing a smile. "How was your day?" "Busy," she said, setting a carton of eggs in the fridge. "Meetings all morning, then I ran into an old friend from college. We grabbed lunch." I nodded, my stomach twisting. Was Greg the bold friend she referred to? The lies came so easily to her, it seemed, woven into the fabric of our everyday life. "That's nice," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm glad you had a chance to catch up." The evening passed in a haze of routine, dinner, homework with the kids, and bedtime stories. Emily was affectionate, even playful, as though nothing was amiss. But I could see it now, the subtle distance in her eyes, the way her phone never left her side. Once the house was quiet, I returned to my office. This time, I didn't just sit and stare at the evidence. I acted. I called Mary and set up a meeting for the next morning. I transferred half of our joint savings into a private account, ensuring I had a financial safety net. Finally, I began compiling a detailed journal of her behavior over the past few months. Every late night, every vague excuse, it all went into the record. As I worked, a sense of clarity emerged. This wasn't just about Emily's betrayal. It was about reclaiming control over my life. For too long, I had been passive, assuming our marriage was as unshakable as it had been in its early years. But love built on lies wasn't love at all. It was a shadow of something real, and I refused to live in shadows anymore. When I finally closed my laptop, the clock read 3 a.m. Exhaustion tugged at me, but so did a quiet determination. The battle ahead would be messy, painful, and far from fair. But I was ready to face it. For my children, for myself, and for the truth. Emily sat across from me at the breakfast table the next morning, her smile warm and her demeanor as familiar as ever. It was astonishing how easily she wore the mask, how flawlessly she could feign normalcy when everything was crumbling beneath the surface. I pushed the scrambled eggs around my plate, the tension in my chest a near-constant companion since I'd uncovered the truth. "I'm taking the kids to the park after work," she said casually, sipping her coffee. "We'll probably grab some ice cream afterward." "That sounds great," I replied, keeping my tone light. "I'll swing by the office late today to catch up on a few things." Her eyes flicked to mine for a brief moment, then back to her cup. "Working late again, huh? Don't overdo it." The irony of her concern nearly made me laugh. She had been working late for years, though her overtime was spent in the company of someone else. I forced a smile and nodded. After dropping the kids at school, I drove to Mary's office downtown. The towering glass building reflected the morning sun, its facade as polished and intimidating as the conversation I was about to have. Mary greeted me with her usual brisk professionalism, ushering me into her office and closing the door behind us. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you again," she said, sitting behind her desk. "What's going on?" I handed her the envelope of evidence. "I need your help. My wife has been having an affair." Mary's expression didn't change as she opened the file, flipping through the pages with a practiced eye. "This is comprehensive," she said after a few minutes. "Who collected this?" "A private investigator," I said. "I wanted to be sure before I did anything drastic." She nodded approvingly. "Smart move. This gives us a strong position, especially if custody becomes an issue." "Have you spoken to her about this yet?" "No," I admitted. "Not yet. I wanted to get everything in place first." Mary leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "Good. The last thing you want is to tip her off before we've secured your interests. Have you thought about what you want out of this?" I hesitated. "I want custody of the kids. I want to protect them from whatever this is." "Understood," she said, jotting down notes. "With this evidence, we have a good shot. Judges don't look kindly on infidelity when children are involved, especially if it impacts their well-being." "What about the house?" I asked. "I want to keep it, for the kids' sake." Mary nodded. "That's likely, given the circumstances. We'll argue that uprooting them would be detrimental. But we'll need to document everything, your parenting involvement, financial contributions, all of it." "I've started a journal," I said. "And I've been moving some money into a private account." "Smart," she said again. "But be careful. If she notices, it could raise suspicions." We spent the next hour outlining a strategy. By the time I left her office, I felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. The wheels were in motion, but the hardest part was yet to come. That evening, Emily was unusually cheerful. She had picked up pizza for dinner, and the kids were animated, chattering about their day at the park. I watched her carefully, looking for cracks in the facade, but she was as radiant and engaging as ever. It was almost enough to make me doubt myself, almost. "Daddy, can we watch a movie tonight?" Sarah asked, her big brown eyes pleading. "Of course," I said, ruffling her hair. "Go pick one out." Liam jumped up, running after his sister toward the living room. Emily smiled, a soft, almost wistful expression. "They adore you, you know." "And I adore them," I replied, holding her gaze. Something flickered in her eyes, guilt, maybe, but she quickly looked away. I'll clean up the kitchen. You go join them. I nodded, walking into the living room where the kids were already squabbling over which movie to watch. Their laughter was a balm to my frayed nerves, a reminder of what I was fighting for. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, I found Emily sitting on the back porch, a glass of wine in her hand. The soft glow of the porch light bathed her in a warm, golden hue, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. Mind if I join you? I asked, stepping outside. She smiled faintly. Of course not. I sat down beside her, the cool night air wrapping around us. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, charged with all the things I couldn't bring myself to say. Do you ever think about when we first met? She asked suddenly, her voice soft. All the time, I lied. She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. We were so young. So, full of dreams. And now? I asked, my tone carefully neutral. Her smile faltered, and she looked away. Life has a way of complicating things. I nodded, the anger simmering just beneath my calm exterior. It does. The conversation lingered in my mind long after she had gone to bed. Her words felt like a confession disguised as nostalgia, a subtle acknowledgement of the growing chasm between us. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized I was ready for what came next. The time for pretending was over. Tomorrow, I would confront her. The morning dawned with a suffocating sense of inevitability. Today was the day I would confront Emily. No more waiting, no more playing my part in the charade of our life together. It was time for the truth to come out, no matter how painful or ugly it might be. Emily was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, humming softly as she packed the kids' lunches. The sight of her, so calm and composed, almost made me falter. Almost. Morning, she said, glancing over her shoulder with a smile. Coffee's ready. Thanks, I replied, pouring myself a cup and sitting at the kitchen table. I watched her move around the room, every gesture practiced and familiar. How many mornings like this had there been? And how many of them had been a lie? Emily, I said, my voice steady but firm. We need to talk. She paused, her hand hovering over the counter. About what? She asked, though there was a slight edge to her voice. Not here, I said, glancing toward the stairs where the kids were getting ready for school. After they leave. She hesitated, then nodded. All right. The morning routine continued in silence, tension hanging heavy in the air. Once Sarah and Liam were on the bus, Emily turned to me, crossing her arms defensively. What's going on, Mark? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I know about Greg, I said, watching her face carefully. For a moment, she didn't react. Then her expression shifted, a mix of shock and fear flashing across her features before she quickly masked it with feigned confusion. What are you talking about? Don't, I said, my voice hardening. I have proof. Emails, photos, hotel receipts. I know everything, Emily. Her face went pale, and she sank into the nearest chair. Mark. How long? I demanded, the words sharper than I intended. She hesitated, her eyes glistening with tears. 3 years, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 years. The weight of her confession hit me like a freight train, even though I already knew the answer. Hearing it from her made it real in a way that no photograph or report ever could. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why would you do this? Emily wiped at her eyes, her tears falling freely now. I don't know, she said, shaking her head. I was lonely, Mark. You were always working, always distracted. And Greg, he made me feel seen, like I mattered. Don't you dare put this on me, I said, anger flaring in my chest. I've worked hard for this family. Everything I've done has been for you and the kids. I know, she said, her voice cracking. I know, and I hate myself for it. But it just happened. It didn't just happen, I snapped. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose him. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing openly now. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice cold. You've been lying to me for years, Emily. To me, to the kids, to yourself. How do you come back from that? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I love you, Mark. I never stopped loving you. Don't, I said, shaking my head. You don't get to say that. Love doesn't look like this. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the only sound her quiet sobs. I felt empty, hollowed out by the enormity of her betrayal. Finally, I spoke again, my voice low and steady. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. A lawyer? Mark, no. Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can. It's too late for that, I said firmly. This isn't just about you and me, Emily. It's about Sarah and Liam. They deserve better than this. What about us? She asked, her voice desperate. What about the life we've built together? You tore that life apart the moment you brought him into it, I said. I'm filing for divorce. Her face crumpled, and she began to cry again, harder this time. Please, Mark, she begged. Don't do this. I'll do anything to make it right. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. It's done, Emily. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sobbing at the table. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I might have faltered, and I couldn't afford to falter now. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and difficult conversations. I sat down with Sarah and Liam one evening, explaining in the gentlest terms I could manage that their mom and I would be living in separate houses. Sarah cried, and Liam didn't fully understand, but they both clung to me as I promised them that we would still be a family, no matter what. Emily moved out shortly after that. The house felt emptier without her, but also quieter, less tense. I found solace in the routine of caring for the kids, in the small victories of rebuilding a life from the wreckage of a broken marriage. Every so often, I would catch glimpses of Emily, picking up the kids, or passing by in her car. Each time, a pang of sadness would hit me, but it was quickly followed by resolve. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. For me, there was no going back. Only forward. The months passed with a slow, grinding inevitability. The house had started to feel like my sanctuary again, a place where the ghosts of betrayal no longer whispered in the corners. Sarah and Liam had adjusted surprisingly well to the new routine, their laughter once again filling the rooms. Emily had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, and though we remained civil for the sake of the kids, our interactions were strained and distant. The divorce proceedings moved forward without incident. I had full custody of the kids, the house, and a newfound sense of clarity about what I wanted from life. The scars Emily had left behind were still tender, but I was learning to live with them. Then, on a quiet Tuesday evening, everything changed. It started with a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the kids were busy upstairs. Setting down my coffee, I crossed the living room and opened the door to find a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, and her eyes were sharp, as if they missed nothing. "Mr. Mark Dalton?" she asked, her voice brisk. "Yes," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder, handing it to me. "My name is Detective Carla Hayes. I'm with the local police department. I need to ask you a few questions about your ex-wife, Emily. The air seemed to shift, and my stomach tightened. What's this about? I asked, flipping open the folder. Inside were photographs of Emily and Greg, together at a restaurant, walking through a park. I recognized them from the private investigator's report. These were taken about 2 weeks ago, Detective Hayes said. Emily and Greg have been under surveillance as part of an ongoing investigation. Investigation? I asked, stunned. What kind of investigation? She hesitated, as if weighing how much to tell me. Mr. Dalton, Greg Preston, your wife's acquaintance, is a suspect in a series of high-profile fraud cases. He's been linked to an organized ring that launders money through various businesses. We believe your ex-wife may have been involved. I blinked, unable to process her words. Emily? Involved in fraud? No, that doesn't make sense. We understand your skepticism, Hayes said, her tone softening slightly. But we have reason to believe she's been using her position at her marketing firm to funnel money into these schemes. We're still piecing it together, but her relationship with Greg is a key part of the puzzle. The room seemed to tilt. Emily's long work trips, the unexplained expenses, the sudden nights out, it all took on a sinister new light. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely audible. We're building a case, Hayes said. But we need your help. Have you noticed anything unusual in her behavior? Any significant purchases, unexplained absences? I thought back to the months before our separation, to the hidden phone, the late nights, the vague excuses. There were things, I admitted. But I thought it was just the affair. Hayes nodded, taking notes. That's understandable. People like Greg are good at manipulating others. It's possible she didn't fully understand what she was getting involved in. I wasn't so sure. Emily was many things, but naive wasn't one of them. What happens if you prove she was involved? I asked. She could face significant prison time, Hayes said bluntly. We're not looking to punish people who were coerced, but if she was a willing participant. Her words trailed off, leaving the unspoken implication hanging in the air. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was this the real reason Emily had been so desperate to save our marriage? Not guilt over the affair, but fear of exposure. The thought made my stomach churn. A week later, the answer came. Emily called, her voice shaking. Mark, I need to see you. Please. What's going on? I asked, already knowing it wouldn't be good. Just, can you meet me at the park? By the playground where we used to take the kids. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived, she was pacing near the swings, her face pale and her hands trembling. What's this about? I asked, keeping my distance. They're coming after me, she said, her voice frantic. The police, they think I was part of Greg's scheme. Were you? I asked sharply. No, she said, tears streaming down her face. I swear, Mark, I didn't know. Greg said it was all legitimate, that the money was clean. I didn't think to question it. I wanted to believe her, but the weight of her past lies hung between us like a wall. Why are you telling me this? Because I need your help, she said, stepping closer. You know me, Mark. You know I would never do something like this. Please, if they ask you anything, tell them I'm not that kind of person. I looked at her, the mother of my children, the woman I had once loved with all my heart. And I realized, with startling clarity, that I didn't know her at all. I'll think about it, I said finally, turning to leave. Mark, please, she called after me. Don't let them take me away from the kids. I didn't look back. For the first time in months, I felt free. Whatever came next, it wasn't my burden to bear. Emily had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences.